I want to keep God's law, not because I have to, but because I love God. Now, I've heard this a lot of times in my life. It's actually a rather noble sentiment. I even understand it, the part especially about the have to. I don't particularly like to do something because I have to. Being motivated properly is a lot nicer. But there are some assumptions behind this that are not entirely clear, and I think might be worth us taking some time to explore. One thing that's not entirely clear is how a person gets to love God in the first place. You know, to say, I want to obey God and to keep His law, not because I have to, but because I love God, presupposes that you love God. Now, I know how I came to love my wife. There are some mysteries of love, of course, that some of us never understand, but in general, we know how the process happens. I know how I came to love my dad. I know how come I love my mother. I know how come I love my sister. I know how come I love my friends. I can figure all that stuff out. But you know, how is it with God, whom you have never seen, with whom you have had no interaction as far as the kind of interaction that you and I depend on for communication and for knowledge and for, you know, making friends and coming to love people? We haven't had anything like that. We know why we love people, and we wonder, of all the things that engender affection between people, which of them apply to God? Now, there's another thing about this that kind of bothers me. And that is the obvious truth that one of the best reasons in the world for keeping the law of God is because you love yourself. Loving God is fine, I suppose. But let's take this example, Leviticus 3 and verse 17. It says this, "It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings that you eat neither fat nor blood." There's a simple law for you. And then another one later says in Leviticus 7:23, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, you shall eat no manner of fat, of ox or sheep or of goat." Now, of course, these are old covenant, and they are abolished, done away with, right along with unclean meats and all that stuff, right? Just do away with it. Well, try telling that to Charles Gross. Mr. Gross, for those of you who don't know, had a physical examination not long ago because he was experiencing some difficulty, and he discovered that his coronary artery was 90% blocked. He went in to have an angiogram followed by angioplasty, only to find out that he had to go further. It wasn't good enough. He had to have a double bypass. It was a very, very unpleasant experience for Mr. Gross. And since that time, he has been going through all of the and by the way, he is doing very, very well. He's coming out of it better than just about anybody has, and of all the sequence of people we've had through our hospital down here, because he, of course, is young and strong. He is recovering very rapidly. He's feeling much better. He's brighter. He's looking forward to coming back to work. In fact, getting very bored at home and chafed with having to stay put, and very anxious to get back to work. But however, in the process of all the education Mr. Gross has been getting, he has been learning that of all the things that he can eat, one of the worst is animal fat. And of course, a long line of other things. So they're overhauling for Mr. Gross a lot having to do with his lifestyle, with his dietary habits, with his exercise habits, with so much of his life needs to change. Now, you wonder, when God told Israel, now it should speak to the children of Israel, saying, you shall eat no matter of fat or ox or sheep or goat and so forth. Why he didn't say to them, because it will clog your arteries. Of course, Israel would have come back and said, well, Lord, what's an artery? They didn't know that stuff, and in fact, God didn't feel any particular reason why they needed to know it. He just said, don't do that. Lay off of that. Now, here's my question. How much do you suppose it really means to God for you to eat fat? Does it hurt his feelings? I don't think so. Does it clog his arteries? Naturally not. Does it shorten his life? Hardly. If you abstain from animal fats, what do you do for God? Now, mind you, I'm all the way back to my question now, this statement. I want to keep God's law, not because I have to, but because I love God. And my question is, well, what about loving you in the process of all this? Listen to this statement out of Job, in the 35th chapter of Job. Now, if you're familiar with the story, Job has undergone this terrible series of trials And the last trial, which may have been the worst of all, was having to listen to these three friends tell him everything in his life that had been possibly wrong with him, that they imagined might be wrong with him, or they could even have possibly have been wrong with him, for hour after hour after hour. And when they got through, the youngest of them, Elihu, said, "I've been listening to this. I can hardly take it anymore." And he was the one fellow that came along and spoke some sense. And some of that sense is found right here in the 35th chapter of the book of Job. Elihu spoke moreover and said, "Do you think this to be right, that you said, 'My righteousness is more than God's'? For you said, 'What advantage will it be to you, and what profit shall I have if I be cleansed from my sins?' How much good can I do God, and how much profit will there be to me for getting rid of my sins?" Now, this is a funny thing, because almost in this concept here is the same concept that exists over in this, "Well, I want to keep God's law because I love Him," is the assumption that we are doing good for God by keeping His law, that it will make Him happy, that it will make Him better, that it will add something to God, that we are good enough to respond to God by keeping His law because we love Him so much. You know, we love people. We send them flowers. We send them gifts. We do things for them. We look after them. We try to protect them. We do all kinds of things for people we love. So God appreciates what we do. Well, wait a minute. He says, you're taking what advantage will it be to you? Or what profit shall I have if I be cleansed from my sin? If I go to all this work to get it out of my life, what difference does it make? I will answer you, and your companions with you. Look to the heavens and see. Behold the clouds which are higher than you. If you sin, what do you do against Him? Tell me, if you can, exactly how you hurt God, harm God, take from God by committing sin. Or, if your transgressions are multiplied, what can you do to Him? If you are righteous, what do you give Him? Or what is He going to receive of your hand? Catch it? If you are righteous, what are you giving Him? So, I want to obey God. I want to keep God's law, not because I have to, but because I love Him, implies precisely this, that if I am righteous, I am somehow giving something to God. Elihu says, "I'm sorry, I don't get it. Your wickedness may hurt a man like you are, and your righteousness may profit the Son of Man." Your wickedness can hurt you. Your righteousness can help you, but they don't do anything, give anything to, or take anything away from God. Now, it seems to me that enlightened self-love would lead a man to keep much of the law of God. Much, I said. That implies that there is some part of the law of God that may be enlightened self-interest, at least unless you take some far-off view of it, might not affect. What about those, and what might those be? If you'll turn back to Matthew, the 22nd chapter, Jesus was here challenged about a matter of law. The Pharisees loved to find something they could challenge him about, always trying to find some means of undermining the things that he was saying and doing. In Matthew 22, and beginning in verse 36, one of those lawyers asked him a question, tempting him, and said this, "Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Of all this great long list of commandments, which of them is the greatest?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first great commandment." So there is a side to this law, then, that does have to do with the law of God. But I think maybe we sometimes get a little bit confused about which came first, about the cause-effect relationship on this. The second is like unto it, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, if you can imagine two pegs driven into the wall and draped over them on thongs, exists every single item out of the law and the prophets on one or the other of these pegs. The first peg You shall love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, soul, strength, and everything that's about you. And then here comes a whole string of laws that descend from and hang on and depend on that principle. Then as the other peg, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And coming down from that exist all these commandments like, you shall not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, you shall not covet anything that is with your neighbor's. If you dig a hole where your neighbor might fall in it, you put a protection thing around that hole so that no one gets hurt. And all of the things that one might have to do having to do with one's neighbor. Then, of course, there are all those things that, in a way, I guess it would come under loving your neighbor as yourself, are those that have to do with loving yourself. Don't eat fat. Don't eat blood. Look out for your health. Stay away of these animals that are out here. You shall not eat them. Not merely because it will make you unclean. They do that from a ceremonial point of view. But apart from ceremony, it says, to start off with, of these animals you shall not eat. Why? Well, hey, it's for you. It's not for God. It isn't going to make him stronger. It isn't going to help his arteries. It's not going to make him live longer for you to obey this law. So keep straight in your mind who it is that you're loving when you're keeping some aspect of God's law, because it may not have that much to do with your love of God, except incidentally far out as God loves you, God would hate to lose you, you destroy your own life, and it harms God in the loss of a son. But that's a little bit farther than we normally take our reasoning when we deal with this kind of subject. So this is the great commandment in the law. Now, think about this for a moment. Tell me this. Can you command your feelings? Let's try a little experiment. Why do you sit there, command yourself to get angry? Go right ahead. Command yourself to be angry. Is it working? It isn't working, is it? You say, be angry. Your body, your mind says, about what? Nothing happened. Now, you could probably sit there and imagine some past wrong or harmful thing or what have you and be able to work up anger, but you don't do that just by commanding yourself to be angry. It doesn't come on command. Feelings don't work that way. Now, that being the case, look at this statement again. What is the first great commandment of the law? Jesus said to us, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the first great commandment. How can God command us to love him when we cannot command our feelings? I can't decide that I'm going to love you. I mean, I can't decide that I'm going to have affection for you. I may, if I know you well, I may, if I spend a lot of time with you, I may, if you and I go through hell together over some terrible problem and we strengthen one another and hold each other up to it, we may come out the other side of that with a great deal of affection, love, and trust for one another, but we don't do it because we are commanded to do it or because we decided to do it. It comes about as a result of things that happen and our response to things that happen. How then does God command us to love him if love is merely a feeling? And therein may lie an important distinction that we tend to overlook from time to time. We cannot even command ourselves to feel different and make it work. So if love is a feeling, then for God to command us to feel differently might be a little bit difficult for us to respond to. Now, could it be that when we talk about love in this context, I want to love God. I want to obey God's commandments because I love him, not just because I have to. And what we are talking about is not feelings at all, at least not from the beginning. Think about it for a moment. In 1 John 5, in verse 2, there is this interesting statement made. By this we know that we love the children of God. How do you know? I mean, I say I love you. How do I know I love you? All right, here's how it is. By this we know it. When we love God, that's first, and keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. Now, if you know how to diagram a sentence, you can simply sit down and say, this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. The love of God is that we keep his commandments. Well then, how do we work it around to where we say, I keep his commandments because I love God? You begin to see the problems that this presents for you from any type of logical structure. Things start cracking apart on you very quickly. That this idea that, well, I don't want to obey God because I have to. I want to keep God's commandments because I love God, runs into logical problems, if not, real human problems on the ground right off the bat. Now, if you'll turn back with me to Deuteronomy, I'd like to try to make another step, one little step at a time, in trying to deal with this, deal with these assumptions, and to understand what it is we're talking about. Deuteronomy 11, verse 8. Therefore shall you keep all the commandments which I command you this day, that you may be strong, and go in and possess the land where you're going to possess it. Now, once again, and I have often said these things, and I will once again, what's the point of the law? Why does God want us to keep the law? What's the result that is to be expected? He says, keep the commandments. Why? That you may be strong. In other words, the obedience to God, the keeping of the commandments, makes changes in you. Following the dietary laws has to do with your arteries, with your stomach, with your digestive system, with your mind, with your health, with your life. Fair enough? And keeping the commandments of God have to do, he says, with your strength. Not merely your physical strength, but your moral character, your strength of character, the kind of people you are. Whether when you face an enemy you're going to face them with courage, or whether you're going to face them with fear. All these things are bound up in obedience to God. Believe it or not. He said, I want you to do this so you can be strong and go in and possess the land, and that you may prolong your days in the land. I don't want you to just go in there and live to the age 50 and die. I want you to go into the land, possess it, and to become an old man, and to see your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, and dandle them on your knee and be able to see them clearly out of your eyes. That's what I want for you. And that's what my law is about, to enable that to happen. For the land that you go in to possess it is not like the land of Egypt to which you came out, where you sowed your seed and watered it with your foot. In other words, you had to get out there with your feet and pump and carry water and water your garden. He said, the land where you're going to possess it is a land of hills and valleys, and drinks the water of the rain of heaven, a land which the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are always upon it from the beginning of the year even to the end of the year. And it shall come to pass, if you shall diligently hearken to my commandments which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Now, this is interesting because it takes off a little bit from what Jesus said of the great commandment, that you shall love him with all your heart and with all your soul and all your strength. Here it defines it to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. One of the first suggestions we get then is that the matter of loving God is serving. In other words, it has to do with things that you do with your hands. That I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that you may gather in your corn and your wine and your oil. I'll send grass in the field for your cattle, that you may eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves that your heart be not deceived, and that you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and he shut up heaven that there be no rain, and that the land yield not her fruit, unless you perish quickly off the good land which the Lord has given you. Then he goes on to say, therefore you shall lay up these my words in your heart and your soul. You are to memorize them. You're to study them, internalize them, make them a part of you and of the way you live your life. Bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. The forehead is the will. The right hand is the work. This is simply not, this isn't merely talking about wrapping things around your hands and putting them on your forehead that have God's commandments on them. It's talking about the fact that the commandments are to be in your head and in your hands. And you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, when you're walking by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You teach your children from the earliest time that they can remember, one, the law of God, and two, that the purpose of the law of God is for your good. Not for God's good, not to make God better, not to somehow reach up to this rather stern, harsh God who's going to get me if I don't keep his commandments. God, for some children, becomes very close to synonymous with the boogeyman, who's going to come and get me if I don't do the right thing. No. Your own ways will come and get you if you don't do the right thing. The children from their very earliest days need to know that the law of God is true, that it's right, that it works, that it's a way of living that helps you, all the way down to things like being healthy and being happy and having good friends and loving people and being appreciated and respected by people. You shall write them upon the doorposts of your house and on your gates, that your days may be multiplied. Why? So God will be bigger and better? So God can live longer? No. So your days will be multiplied, and the days of your children in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, as the days of heaven upon the earth. For, if you shall diligently keep all these commandments, which I command you to do them, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all of his ways and cleave to him, then will the Lord drive out all these nations before you. Now the structure of that little sentence there is a little odd in a sense, because what it is really saying is, you keep the commandments to love God. But that's actually the way you go about loving God. It is not the other way around. You love God, or the other way around is, you love God to keep the commandments. What he is saying is, you keep the commandments to love God. There is a theology that says in so many words that if you love God, you have kept the commandments. This is a curious little thing. You know, there are more strange and perverted doctrines having to do with the law of God than anything else I can think of. And it's not hard to understand. Because the truth is that the law of God gets in the way of our appetites. The law of God gets in the way of our urges, of the things we want, the things we like to have. It suggests to us that the easy way doesn't work, and that's not a popular idea. And so man has more ways of disposing of the law of God. The number of different doctrinal approaches to getting rid of the law of God is about as many as there are doctrinal denominations in this country. Like I said, I checked, there were 500 of them, and I'm sure, and they're getting more by the hour from the Worldwide Church of God. But the fact is that they're all over the place, and every outfit out there that wants not to keep the law of God, or some part of the law of God, has their own peculiar little doctrinal structure about why it is that we don't want to keep God. One of them is, well, keeping the law is love. Therefore, if you love God, you have kept the commandments. And so all these other Old Testament laws are not very important, because all the commandments are kept in this one thing, that you have a good, warm feeling toward God. That's what it seems to be. Now, back to the commandment that we should love God. Is the law an end in itself, or is it a means to an end? Now, this is a relatively simple question. To the Pharisees, and I would have to say to not a few people in the Worldwide Church of God, it was the former. That is, the law was an end in itself. In other words, what we're headed for here is the keeping of the law. In one small way, this is implicit in the statement that I started out with. I want to keep God's law, not because I have to, but because I love God. Follow me? I love God in order to, or that leads me to keep the commandments, so that the love of God is a means to an end, and the end is to keep the commandments. And so it was really for the Pharisees, that the commandment was the end. It was the objective. It was that which was honored. I was struck once when I attended a bar mitzvah in a synagogue. As a part of the service, they opened up the place where the Torah was kept, the scroll that they had. And they took the scroll out, and everybody stood up. And there was there was no representation particularly of God, nor any conversation so much about God. That all of the focus was on the law. I mean, the scroll was carried around the room, and everybody stood while the scroll was carried about the room. And it almost brought back little memories of down in Latin America, where they will carry the statue of the Virgin Mary through the streets, and all the praying and bowing and crossing themselves and so forth. It was almost as though the scroll of the law itself had been made into an idol. Is it possible that the law of God could become an idol? Sure. Sure it could. If the law is the end, justified by certain means leading up to it, and that's what we live for. If we live for the law, then the law has become an idol. But on the other hand, if the law is a means to an end, then it's important for us to understand the distinction between those and to understand where all that goes. The idea of the Pharisees, well, you keep the law no matter what. They even built a fence around the law. They generated a fear that God will get you if you offend in the least little item of the law. And if you break some little twig out on the end of a branch, on the end of a limb, out way off the tree out here, if you break that one little law, God's going to get you. And you're just in a whole lot of trouble, and you're going to have to go through all this trouble to make that one thing right in order to get yourself back right with God. The truth is, most of us fell clean out of the tree a long time ago, much less breaking twigs. And we need Jesus Christ somehow to bring us back to God and to Him and to a love of Him. But one of the ways in which that takes place is by repentance. Repent of what? Of sin. What sin? Sin is the transgression of the law. So the law, once again, is not a means to salvation. The law and our breaking of it is what causes us to need salvation in the first place. You know, one of the key differences is that those who think this way, that is, that the law is an end in itself, do not learn much from the law. They really don't. They learn about the law. They learn how to keep the law. They study the law to find out things like about mixed fabrics and whether it's all right to wear woolen background or whether, a linen background mixed will work, or whether it's all right to have elastic in your socks and the whole thing. They'll study the law but they don't learn from it. It is enough for some people simply to keep it. And so they start the Sabbath 30 minutes before sundown and end it 30 minutes after sundown. Because whatever happens in our life, we must not, under any circumstances, transgress the law. For the law, well, that's like God, in a sense. Now, I do not belittle care in keeping the law, but we need to understand what the law is. It is a means to an end. And what is that end? What is that purpose? Well, in this statement that Jesus made, the great commandment of the law is, you shall love God, the Lord your God. We are commanded to love God. How do we do that? Where do you start? What are you going to do? Here you are. You may not know whether you love God or not. You want to love God. You're supposed to love God. But as far as feeling anything, when I say the word God, or I should pronounce His name as Jehovah or Yahweh, or however I should do it, if I should, be talking about God, perhaps if my skills are sufficient, I might be able, by talking about God, to generate some sense of awe among us all about the greatness of His creation and the universe and all of that. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about love of God. Where does this come from? How would you actually make a start in determining whether you did or whether you didn't, or if you did or didn't, you got to love God or to love God more? The entirety of the law teaching device, it is there to show us how. We have these two big pegs hanging up here. One, love your neighbor as yourself. How do you do that? Well, we go looking down the little strings hanging off of it to find little statements like, you shall not steal. Okay, I got that. That makes sense to me. I understand how to do that. What not to do. You shall not bear false witness. And there are all sorts of commandments and statutes and judgments, mostly in the Old Testament. We get some interpretations of some of these things in the New Testament as well, all of which though hang from that same peg. We'll yank that peg out. God's not going to yank that peg out of the wall and let all this stuff fall, because it is all important to us. Otherwise, how can we know? Who's going to teach us? Who's going to explain to us how systematically to love our neighbor? What to do for our neighbor? What not to do to our neighbor? All that is very important. The law is there to teach us about human nature. What works, what doesn't. The law is also there to teach us about the divine nature. Now tell me, do you think you know enough about God? No, of course not. None of us feel that we know enough about God. Maybe afraid to learn a little bit more, but that fear passes quickly. We really would probably like to learn more about God. How do you learn more about God? What is His value system? What does He stand for? What is He doing? What does He intend to do? How great is He really? I'd like to know more about God. I'd like to be able to grasp His greatness. I'd like to be able to know more about what He intends to do. Because what He intends to do could have a rather serious effect on my life in one way or another as time goes by. Well, step one, absolutely the first step that would have anything to do with God, is a thing called worship. Now, worship is often thought of as an extreme form of love. I absolutely worship the ground she walks on. I don't really love this person, I worship this person, is a term that is sometimes used in our society. But actually, in the biblical sense, worship has no emotional content really at all. In both Old Testament and New Testament, it means one thing and one thing only, and that is to do obeisance to. The word means to bow down, truly and simply. Sometimes to bow down extremely and to put one's face toward the ground, to put one's head to the earth. In the New Testament, the word for worship means roughly the same thing. It actually means almost like in the Oriental expression of to kiss the hand toward. That was the kissing of the hand and the moving of the hand out to say, it's like I'm kissing your hand as my Lord, my Master. It is an outward sign that says, I will obey you. Because in the word obeisance is the word obey, and that is essentially what the word worship means. So in that sense, love, the keeping of the commandments of God, is connected to worship. The Hebrew word for worship means to bow down, and in this sense, in Genesis 23, verse 7, I won't turn there, Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, even to the children of Heth the Hittite. So Abraham was not worshiping the Hittites. He simply, in that context, he was in their land, he stood up, he bowed himself down, saying, I am obeying the laws of your land, I'm going to be, a citizen here, I'm going to live here, whatever it was that he was doing. So it's not wrong in that sense for him to do obeisance in a human sense. In that world, at that time, the signs of obeisance were well known. They were to bow down, depending upon the greatness of the person who was concerned, to prostrate yourself completely on the ground. So this is what we mean in the Bible when we say worship. So I say the place we start is with worship. And sure enough, when we pray, we bow down. We put our face toward the ground. We humble ourselves before God, and we say, oh, here I am. Now, to bow down before God is only a start. Obeisance without obedience means what? Nothing. Maybe it means hypocrisy. But to do obeisance, that is to bow ourselves down, to say by the outward act, and by the way, body language is all we're talking about, is about say by your body language, I will obey you. When we are not prepared to obey God, it's hypocrisy. It's a lie. Now, back in Luke, the 6th chapter, this theme, this idea, is expressed very well by Jesus himself. In Luke, the 6th chapter, and beginning in verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say? To call him Lord is to do obeisance. It is to say, I recognize you as my master. You are my Lord. Now, why are you calling me that? Why are you using that language when you won't do what I say? Whosoever comes to me and hears my saying and does them, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man who built a house and dig deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently upon that house, could not shake it because it was founded upon a rock. But he that hears and doesn't do it is like a man who without any foundation built a house on the earth, against which the stream did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. We're talking about something real here. And he was saying this, that if you hear my words and you do them, if you call me Lord and you keep what I say, if you do obeisance and then obey, it will have a real result in your life. Your life will be like a house founded upon a rock. But I will tell you this, that if you pretend to obey, if you do obeisance and then refuse to obey, if you won't actually live the life, walk the walk, if all you can do is talk the talk, your life is going to be like a life founded on the sand, and it will not stand up to adversity. It just won't work. It will not happen. But you should also know this. It is not obedience for obedience's sake. It is not obedience merely for the sake of obedience. And it is through the commandments that we come to know God, to understand His plan, and to understand what He is doing. Through the commandments, we come to know God, to understand His plan, and to know what He is doing. And we also come to know that He is our Father. There's a familiar little passage back in the 20th chapter of Exodus, verse 8. Very familiar to all of you. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the rest of Jehovah your God. Now bear in mind that the word Sabbath simply means rest. It goes on to say that in it you shall not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, your cattle, your stranger that's within your gate. Why? Why is it that you and I are not supposed to work on the seventh day? He says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth. Jehovah made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. The seventh day is the rest of Jehovah. When we rest in that day, we do so because He created the heavens and the earth in 7 days, and the 6 days, and the seventh day He rested. That's why we rest. We rest, oh sure, we rest because we're tired. We rest because we need to rest. We rest because it's good for us to get a good night's sleep and sleep in the next morning and have a little time for ourselves and our family. But the first reason we do it is because He did it. It's the rest of Jehovah. So we rest. And in that, Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day, and He hallowed it. We honor Him as members of His family by resting on His day of rest with Him. It is not ours, it is His. Jesus made plain with the statement the Sabbath was not made for man, but the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. I really got that one backwards. The law, He said, is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. It's good for man. It's not something that's just out there for a man to do. Can I worship God any way I please? Now remember, we get a lot of abuse of the word worship nowadays, don't we? To worship basically means to go to church. Whereas in the Bible, the word worship means to do obeisance. It's what happens when we stand up, when the scripture is read. It's what happens when we kneel down when we pray, or when we're standing in church and we bow our heads and turn our faces to the ground. It is a form of obeisance before God, while one up here prays before God on behalf of all of us. We come here to worship, that is, to do obeisance. We also sing praises to God. We are also taught out of God's Word, which is again a form of obeying God in that sense. So we understand from all of this that this is worship. But for many people, it doesn't seem to mean a great deal. Again, is there a right way to worship? Is there a right time? Is there a wrong time? Is there a right place? Is there a wrong place? Is there a right set of symbols? Is there a wrong set of symbols? Symbols, after all, are merely a form of language. If you study it very much, you'll begin to realize that when you look down the page on your Bible and you see there the word prophet, you see it's P-R-O-P-H-A-T. P is a symbol, R is a symbol, O is a symbol. This particular combination of symbols we have all agreed upon means prophet. Well, it's pronounced prophet. And we have all agreed that the symbol prophet, as we pronounce it, stands for something. It talks about a man or a woman who has received a message from God and is speaking under inspiration to people. It's a symbol upon which we have agreed. When we unleaven our homes in the spring, we speak God's language. We actually speak God's language when we get all the leavening out of our house in the spring of the year during the right day, during the right 7 days. If we are out at sunrise, bowing down, doing obeisance to the sun and its rising, the language is all wrong. If on December 25th we put up a tree in our house and decorate it, tell our kids all about Santa Claus, same time we're talking about Jesus Christ and the way in the manger and all this type of stuff, the language is all wrong. We cannot do obeisance to God or worship God in that way. If we confess that we are strangers and pilgrims upon the earth, and we keep the Feast of Tabernacles as a part of that confession at the right time, in the right place, The language is right. The holy days are among the richest sources I have ever found of the knowledge of God. I owe more than I could ever tell you to the keeping of the holy days, year in, year out, of the growth of the knowledge of who God is, what He has done, what He is doing, what He is going to do, why He is doing it, where all this stuff is going, and the process of observing these days and coming to know Him. I am coming to love Him. I am loving Him by the keeping of the commandments. But somewhere along the line there is that spark being fanned of what we call love or affection for God as Father. It's a curious little emotion, love, in that sense. And it does not come easily. And it doesn't come automatically in that way. Which would you say then is more true? We love God and so we keep His commandments. Or we keep His commandments and so we love God. Why do you love God? Why do you love anyone? Leaving out for a moment the troublesome complications of the opposite sex. Who do you love of the same sex, and how did you come to love them? Well, you came to love them because you shared some of the same experiences, you have shared values, you have shared beliefs, you spend a lot of time together, you depend on one another, you have respect for one another, sometimes you even have admiration for one another. If someone gives us advice and we ignore it consistently, what will they assume? Well, they will correctly assume that we do not respect them. And so it is that God, who hands out His advice to us freely, constantly, and sees that advice ignored regularly, will assume, rightly, that we do not respect Him. And there is no basis for love. There is no place, there is no spark there for us to fan and to try to bring to life and to cause it to amount to something or to come to be more than it now is. There's an old saying to the effect that if you're ever in trouble and you need help, do not go to someone you have helped before. If you expect gratitude, you will usually be disappointed. If you're in trouble and you need help, go to someone who has helped you before. Because here is someone who cares about you. Here is someone who, through the process of doing something for you, came to appreciate you and to love you. It is an odd thing. We build much more love for a person by doing things for them than we do by having things done for us. Human beings, I'm afraid, are ungrateful wretches for the most part. You learn to love over time with people, don't you? Why should we think that it would be any different with God? Why should we think that with God we can have love at first sight? You know, part of the problem is so many people are looking for feeling. There is a lack of feeling in their life. There's a void down in the middle of everything there. There's an emptiness, a need to feel something relative to religion. And they go looking for emotion in religion without looking for what causes the emotion, if there is to be any, to come into existence. There's a difference between going looking for the emotion and looking for what makes the emotion. It's like going looking for love without considering the fact that there are things that create love. There are things that make love. There are things that build love. There are things that make love grow. And it don't happen overnight. When you go looking for love overnight, well, we know how much trouble people can get into with that. But people do the same thing religiously. They go looking for the emotion without looking for what lies behind it or might create it. The search for emotion leads to emotionalism in religion, to a kind of a sentiment without real heart. There is, by the way, an artificial sentiment, isn't there? You can actually be moved to tears, great tears rolling down your face, by fiction. It can happen reading a novel. It can happen in a movie. You can be moved to great emotion by absolute fiction. But you can also be moved to tears by a real love for a real person or a real God when that God becomes real. And God does not become real overnight. You do not love God overnight. You don't fall in love with God. You know, it's a different, interesting little distinction. We know about God through the law. And we actively love God by keeping His law. But we come to know God through His Son. We come to know Him through His Son because we come at some point in our life to realize that all the law-keeping I'm doing right now isn't doing anything about all the law-breaking I've also been doing all my life, and it can't put it right. There's nothing I can do to put it right. I keep the law because it's good for me. I keep the law because in the process I learn about God, but I cannot do anything with keeping of the law to put right all the hurts and the damage that I've done to other people and the harm that I've done to myself and the destruction of my life by the past. I can't do anything about that. There's only one way that can be done, and that is through the Son of God, through Jesus Christ. I want you to turn back to Romans, the 10th chapter, because there's something that's not easy to understand that I want to make a run at today to try to help you to grapple with. In Romans, the 10th chapter, in verse 1, Brethren, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves to the righteousness of God. Now, what is this talking about? Well, it's talking about a people to whom the law is an end in itself, and they have pursued their own righteousness by works of law. They are such good people that they're going to go out there and keep that law and keep it diligently and find their righteousness in it all. And they have not even begun to understand the objective of righteousness. You know, back in the Psalms, the righteousness is defined very simply. It says, all your commandments are righteousness. Now, he continues to say, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes. Now, I heard someone once upon a time, see there, Christ is the end of the law is gone. But wait, there's another meaning for the word end. It means the end in the sense of goal or objective. I've been talking all through this sermon about the law. Is it a means to an end, or is it an end in itself? It's a means to an end, all right? What's the end? Christ is the end of the law, the objective of the law, the purpose of the law, for righteousness to everyone who believes. Who believes God. God stands up and says to man, this is the way. Keep my commandments so you can live long on the land. People will go charging out there, keeping all the commandments, because if I don't keep them, God will get me. And because in keeping the commandments, I become respectable or likable or righteous or good, or I wear a badge and I have all of the law laid out, you know, I keep the law perfectly in all of its fashions. I'm not like that man over there. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. You see, they have just not submitted themselves to the righteousness of God, which is a matter of believing God. That when He says, look, you keep these commandments so you can live long on the land I've given you. You keep these commandments so it will be well with you and with your children. That the law is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Obey me, not because of me, but because of you. And what he is saying is, you won't believe God when He tells you that. But the obedience to God is a simple matter of faith. I have the faith to believe that what God tells me is for my good. It is for my good in my life, with me and my children. It is for my good that I may come to know God. It is for my good that I will worship God in the right way and come to understand what He is doing. It is for my good that I can come ultimately to relate to God, and I can come ultimately to love God, not only with my hands and the things that I do, but with my heart and with my mind, so that I would feel somehow, someday, a real, genuine love for God. And that when I find myself standing on the sea of glass before Him, I would not be scared out of my wits, but my heart, my life would be bursting with a love, what shall we call it, that you and I probably could not quite grasp. But at long last, the affection, the feeling, the love will be there. The righteousness of faith. Moses describes the righteousness of the law that the man that does these things shall live in them. And it actually makes his life better. But the righteousness of faith speaks this way. Don't say in your heart, who will descend into heaven to bring Christ down. Do you think you can go up there and get him and bring him down? Don't say in your heart, who's going to go into the grave and bring him back up from the grave. You can't do anything to accomplish your salvation. What does it say? The word is near you, even in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith which we preach. But if you will confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and shall believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. So it's not something hard. It's real close to you. It's in your mouth. It's in your life. And then back in Philippians. In Philippians, the 3rd chapter. You find just exactly where I want to start with this one. I think verse 1. Finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things to you, to me, is not grievous, but for you it is safe. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the concision. All kinds of headaches, troubles, and so we get in the church from people who are of the circumcision. They worship God. We are the circumcision who worship God in the Spirit, verse 3, and rejoice in Christ Jesus and have no confidence in the flesh. I don't believe that there's a thing in the world that I can do in my life, my body, or anything else that can save my life. I don't keep the law to save me. I keep the law to love God as an expression of love to Him. For though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any man thinks he has whereof he might trust the flesh, I've got more than that. I was circumcised the 8th day. I'm of the stock of Israel. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrews. Touching the law, I was a Pharisee. You want to know about zeal? I persecuted the church. Touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. If we're trying to avoid blame, I made it. I got there. All the way out to the avoidance of blame as being that the law, if the law is an end in itself, I was at the end. I got it. I accomplished it all. But what things were gained to me, I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of everything, and count them but dung, that I may win Christ, and may be found in Him, not having my own righteousness, which I built up in the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith. Remember, all your commandments are righteousness. That the commandment keeping that is in my life would be a matter of faith, because I believe God, as a way of loving God, as a response to God, not only to learn about Him, but to keep my own life on the right track. Why do I want to do all that? That I may know Him. Real simple. That I may know Him, and the power of His resurrection, and the fellowship of His suffering, being made conformable unto His death, if by any means I might attain to the resurrection of the dead. To want to obey God because you love Him is an admirable goal. But to love God by obeying Him in faith will take you where you want to go.